My name is Scott, and I have always loved spending time in the woods. I knew my forest outside of town, inside and out. It was a peaceful place where I could escape the city's hustle and enjoy nature. But one day, the forest revealed its dark side, and now I no longer feel safe when I enter it. It happened on a late autumn evening. The sun was setting, and the long shadows of the trees were creeping over the path. The air was fresh and cool, smelling of damp earth and pine. I was walking my usual trail when I suddenly heard a strange rustling behind me. I stopped and looked back, but saw no one. Probably just a small animal, I thought, and continued on my way. But a few minutes later, I heard the rustling again, like someone sneaking through the bushes next to the trail. This time, I felt a tightening inside. I stopped and stared into the undergrowth. The forest was utterly silent, and that silence became oppressive. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling of dread persisted. I moved faster, but the strange feeling didn't leave me. Suddenly, I noticed some movement out of the corner of my eye. I stopped and stared in that direction. In the gathering twilight, I saw something strange among the trees. Something small and dark was hiding between the trunks. I couldn't make out exactly what it was. It seemed to be hiding in the shadow, not letting me see it clearly. My heart began to race. I stood rooted to the spot, staring at the figure that flickered. I tried to figure out what it could be. An animal? A person? Something else? Suddenly, the creature began to move, not towards the trail but along it, following me at a distance. It moved quickly and silently, and I realized it wasn't an animal. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead, and I knew I had to get out of there as fast as possible. I started walking briskly down the trail, trying not to look back, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. The rustling continued. It seemed like the creature was following me, hiding in the shadows of the trees. I quickened my pace until I was running. Branches whipped my face, dry leaves and twigs crunched underfoot. The forest around me seemed alive, hostile, ready to swallow me at any moment. Finally, I burst into a small clearing, and everything went silent. The forest seemed to hold its breath. I stopped, breathing heavily, and looked around. No one, just silence and twilight. I started to calm down, but then I heard the rustling again, now much closer. And then I realized it wasn't just rustling. It was almost like a whisper, indistinct and threatening. This time I didn't wait. I bolted, not caring about the path, crashing through the bushes and leaping over fallen trees. My panic drove me, and I felt neither fatigue nor pain. I heard only my breath and my heartbeat in my ears, and somewhere at the edge of my consciousness, the same strange rustlings that had been following me. When I finally emerged from the forest onto the road, I stopped, went over, and stood there, gasping for breath. The forest behind me was as quiet as ever, but I knew that somewhere in its depths something had been watching me, something evil and otherworldly. Since then, I haven't gone back to that forest. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I don't want to test it again. I no longer feel safe among the trees. The forest I once knew and loved has become a foreign and frightening place to me. And, to be honest, I'm not sure I will ever forget that fear. My name is Anna, and I have always loved hiking in the woods. Since childhood, my parents took me along the trails of our hometown, and I learned to feel nature, trust my instincts, and understand the forest as my own home. So, when my friend suggested a hike into the dense woods outside of town, I eagerly agreed. This place was known for its wilderness and impenetrability. Locals often said it was best not to go there, but we ignored the warnings. There were 4 of us: me, my friend Clara, her boyfriend Tom, and my friend Alexei. We decided to spend 2 days and 1 night in the forest. The day went perfectly. We walked along the trail, laughing, telling stories, enjoying the scent of pine and the freshness of the forest air. As dusk approached, we set up a camp in a small clearing and lit a fire. Clara suggested cooking dinner while Alexei and I decided to explore the surroundings. As we moved away from the camp, I noticed that the forest seemed to grow denser. The tree branches interlaced tightly overhead, and sunlight barely filtered through. We walked in silence, and I listened to the forest. It was too quiet. Suddenly, Alexei grabbed my hand and froze. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I listened but heard nothing but the pounding of my own heart. "No, what?" I asked. "A whisper somewhere ahead," he said, staring into the darkness between the trees. We decided to head back, but the path seemed longer than before. Night fell and the forest around us grew darker and more ominous. When we returned to camp, we saw Clara and Tom sitting by the fire, looking worried. "Where have you been? We heard some strange noises," Clara said. We told them about the whisper, and Tom decided it was best for us to stay together. As night fully set in, the forest was enveloped in complete darkness. The fire was our only source of light and warmth. I felt uneasy, and, judging by my friends' faces, they were on edge too. Suddenly, from deep within the forest, came that same whisper. Now, everyone could hear it. It was faint but clear, as if someone was calling us, one by name. A chill ran down my spine. "Maybe it's some tourists." Tom tried to joke, but his voice trembled. We didn't know what to do, so we decided to stay by the fire until dawn. But the whisper didn't stop. It grew louder, as if approaching us. At some point, Clara couldn't take it anymore and stood up. "I can't listen to this anymore. I'm going to the tent," she said. But as soon as she took a step, there was a loud crack from the darkness, and the bushes near the tent rustled. We all froze. We stared into the darkness, trying to understand what it was, and then we saw a figure, tall, thin, like an elongated shadow. It stood a few meters from us, motionless. I felt my heart racing wildly. Tom, taking a flashlight, slowly pointed the beam at the figure, but it vanished, just melted into the darkness. "We need to get out of here," Alexei shouted, grabbing his things. No one argued. We hastily packed up and headed back along the trail. But the further we went, the more the forest around us changed. The path we had come on seemed completely different, as if it had been rebuilt. The trees closed in, forming a dense wall. We walked, trying to keep each other in sight, when we heard the whisper again. But this time, it was right behind us. I looked back and saw the shadow moving after us, this time faster. "Run!" screamed. We all started running, not caring about the path. I heard my friend's heavy breathing and the rustling of branches hitting our faces and arms. The shadow pursued us, and I felt its malevolent presence. When we finally burst into an open clearing, the shadow stopped. It stood at the edge of the forest, not moving any further. We were exhausted, scared out of our minds, but alive. We didn't stop to figure out what it was. We just kept running until we were out of the forest. Only when we reached our cars did we feel safe. Since then, none of us have ever returned to the forest. And now I understand that sometimes rumors and legends have a real basis. The forest can be beautiful and friendly, but sometimes it holds secrets that are best left undiscovered. My name is Mark, and I have never told the story to anyone before. It happened 5 years ago, but those events still haunt me in my nightmares. My friend Max and I decided to spend a weekend in the wilderness, deep in the forest, about 20 kilometers from the city. We often went camping, and this time seemed no different. But I had no idea that this trip would change my life forever. We set off early on a Saturday morning, hoping to reach an old cabin that some friends had told us about. It was located on the edge of the forest, far enough from roads and trails so that no one would disturb us. The forest welcomed us kindly. Fresh air, birds chirping, and the rustle of leaves were calming. We chatted cheerfully as we walked along the barely visible path. By noon, we reached the cabin. It was abandoned, with a partially collapsed roof and boarded-up windows. Inside, it was dusty and empty, but despite everything, it suited us just fine. We began unpacking our things, lit a fire at the entrance, and started preparing lunch. Max went to fetch water from a nearby stream, and I stayed behind at the cabin. An hour passed, but Max still hadn't returned. I called out for him, but there was only silence and response. I felt a sense of unease and decided to go look for him. I followed the path to the stream, but there was no sign of Max. Suddenly, I noticed tracks on the ground. They led deeper into the forest, in a direction we hadn't planned to go. I followed the tracks, feeling my anxiety grow. The forest around me seemed to darken and every sound felt threatening. Suddenly, I stumbled upon something on the ground. It was Max. He was lying on his back, his eyes wide open, staring into nothingness. On his neck, I saw a deep gash. I froze in place, unable to believe my eyes. Horror washed over me. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. I don't know how long I stood there, but suddenly I heard a rustling in the bushes. Someone was watching me. I felt my blood run cold, realizing I needed to act. I started to back away slowly, never taking my eyes off the spot where the sound had come from. I slowly turned around and began to run towards the cabin. I don't know how long I stood there, but suddenly I heard a rustling in the bushes. Someone was watching me. I felt my blood run cold, realizing I needed to act. I started to back away slowly, never taking my eyes off the spot where the sound had come from. I slowly turned around and began to run towards the cabin. I ran blindly, jumping over roots and branches, until I made it back to the cabin. But when I got there, I realized someone had already been there. All things were scattered, the fire was out, and there was a strange mark carved into the cabin door, a symbol I had never seen before. I knew I couldn't stay there for even a minute longer. I grabbed my backpack and ran toward the road. It took me several hours to make it out of the forest and onto the highway. The entire time I felt like someone was following me. I flagged down a passing car and asked for a ride back to the city. I was shaken with fear and could barely speak. Once back, I immediately reported what had happened to the police. The next day, they found Max's body, but nothing else. No tracks, no evidence, just that strange mark on the cabin door. 5 years have passed, and I still don't know what happened that day in the forest. Someone or something killed my friend, and could have killed me too. I never returned to that forest and avoid any kind of hiking now. Sometimes I feel like I can still hear the whisper of the trees calling me back, but I know one thing for sure. I will never go back to that forest again.